Welcome to Matrix Unlocked 43. I thought I don't know what made me think of it. I thought I'd have a look at Alcatraz. So I pulled up this Google Earth image, just give you a brief sort of look at it. You obviously do this yourselves on Google Maps and go in closer. I'm not going to do that because I need about 3 or 4 hands to do that. But I just wanted to point out, first impressions, it just looks like a ship. I'll just try and pull this back. I think you can see what I mean with the overall shape, but I can't help noticing when you start looking closer at some of these different bits and pieces, it's got that look and feel of a star fort about the whole structure. Now I happened to look at, I got sent this link earlier, and I'll put the link in the description. It's called Beneath Alcatraz, a trip through the citadel or dungeon. I thought, well, that's an unusual term anyway, citadel. But then you've got this tunnel that took sewage to the bay, and it is all brick, including this arch down here and all this brickwork. And within the first minute or so, when they start going down the steps, I thought, I've seen this before. And not far away from where I am, you've got this Landguard Fort at Felixstowe in Suffolk, and you can see very clearly on this one it is definitely a star fort. But what struck me, and I remember this from looking around this place, is the quality of the brick. You'll find this on military installations as well. If you feel the brick itself, and even by looking at it, it is a much denser, much more solid construction and quality than the domestic bricks that we use, which I think explains why a lot of these structures, regardless of what they tell us about the history, because clearly these things have been, like on this one, this has been added anyway. It just doesn't make any sense with any of this. But going back to this Alcatraz, when you look at what it says about the history of it, for example, it implies that they would have had to dig down to put this brick in. Now, I'm suggesting this is far older. I mean, it may well originally have been a remains of a huge ship from the days of, shall we say, the flood, when California was an island, and it's the highest point that is now petrified. But there's also the question of all this brick. I looked on the good old reliable wiki about Alcatraz. The main cell house was built incorporating some parts of Fort Alcatraz's citadel, a partially fortified barracks from 1859 that had come into use as a jail. A new cell house was built from 1910 to 1912 on a budget of $250,000, blah, 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 blah. But it doesn't, the narrative, like with so many of these other things, it just doesn't fit. The same with Landguard Fort, but here we have the first fortifications from 1540 were a few earthworks. Then in 1667 the Dutch landed a force of 2,000 men on Felixstowe beach in front of what is now called Undercliff Road East, and advanced onto the fort. Well, I don't know why they would even bother. They could have just bypassed the fort and had a lot more success. But what is also interesting is it mentions then about this Nathaniel Darrell and his garrison of 400 musketeers of the Duke of York and Albany's Maritime Regiment, the 1st English Marines, and 100 artillerymen with 54 cannons in 1667. But these citadel towers look like prefabricated concrete, the sort of thing that would have been put in the Second World War. It certainly doesn't look like something that was built in 1667. Again, put in Landguard Fort. There is the spelling of it. Hopefully it will come up clear. I should put links in the description about all this, but just compare Landguard Fort, the narrative of that, compare it with Alcatraz. It's very hard to actually find anything on YouTube, for example, on Alcatraz that does not sort of go off and start talking about the famous names amongst the criminal fraternity that were inmates here, some and all the escapes and things. To actually find information purely on the structure is it's a bit of a minefield to go through, but none of this narrative seems to make any sense about all this. But I'll leave that. I don't know if anybody else has actually covered Alcatraz in any detail, but I would welcome John Levi. I'm going to send you a link. I would love it if you looked into this structure, or Martin Leaker, or anybody else, Niven, Captain Kirk, brilliant videos on their channels. So please, or Paul, Black Sheep Researcher, Outcast Style. I'd like to invite one of you who can do a far better presentation than I can on these structures, and you've got much better research and technical know-how to put these videos together. I'm just relying on using a handheld phone and the computer screen, so I apologise for the poor clarity and the slight shakiness of my hand with all this. But just go back to Landguard Fort at Felixstowe Docks. Worth having a look at the narrative, but as you can see, that is clearly a star fort, and I would suggest Alcatraz also is. There is another Alcatraz apparently, I think in Scandinavia. They always talk about Alcatraz as being a standalone prison, and it does seem to be rather hyped up. There's some pretty horrific stories about Russian prisons, for example, and I don't think I'd want to go in any of them, given the choice. Well, not unless as a visitor anyway. But yeah, so that's Landguard Fort at Felixstowe and Alcatraz. Worth having a look and comparing the two. There's plenty of websites if you just type in either name, and you can read all the official narrative on it, but it's like everything else, make your own mind up. I choose to do comparative studies and look at the overall similarity in the structures of these things. Same with these, what we call pillboxes that were erected on the corners of fields and beside railway lines in strategic places. The quality of the brick is such that these things are almost near impossible to demolish, it would seem these days, or the cost is prohibitive because they are of such a high quality brick construction, certainly far more than domestic bricks. So I'll leave that one there, and for those interested, that was the Nocturne from Borodin's String Quartet number 2. Borodin being Russian, that's the closest I could find to anything that's Tartarian, but again, what do we really know about these composers and famous musicians? How much of that is actually true and how much is fitting an official narrative? That opens up a whole new line of exploration. And then when we think about the remote writing and how things seem to be put out within lyrics of songs of today, well, maybe that sort of thing was going on, or has been going on for a long time. I would suggest that Wagner's epic Ring of the Nibelung, which you can see almost where Tolkien got the idea of Lord of the Rings from. The basic story with as I've mentioned on a video I did a long time ago, the basic story, to sum it all up with Wagner's Ring, is all about gold as a symbol of nature and beauty, and how it is corrupted and used for power and for self-serving, and then it is taken back again by nature. So that in itself is worth at least having a look at, reading the synopsis. Not everybody likes the shrill voices of the Sopranos, for example. But anyway, that's enough from me, and I wish you all a wonderful day, and thank you for listening. Please do leave comments to this video as well. Thank you.